They said the Irish Sea wore a pewter skin that October morning, the wind scratching small ridges across it as the RMS Leinster steamed out from Kingstown. Families waved from the east pier until the lighthouse slid astern. Soldiers in greatcoats packed the rails beside nurses and postal clerks in visor caps who would sort letters while the ship crossed to Holyhead. Captain William Birch stood the bridge with a tugman's steadiness, watching for the thin white signatures every sailor feared. Convoys were scarce, warnings were posted, lifebelts were already out of their racks. By 1918, people spoke openly about the war ending soon. The water, indifferent to talk, kept its own timetable. Below decks, the moving post office ticked like a metronome. Pouches opened, letters trussed, stamps checked, the canceling hammer falling in a rhythm that matched the engines. In the saloon, spoons clicked in saucers, and conversation held to a careful volume. The Leinster was a familiar boat on a familiar route. Routine is how people hide from menace. Even so, a few passengers cast glances toward the gray horizon and practiced in private the drill they had been told never to forget. Shortly after the headlands dwindled, a shiver of alarm swept forward from the lookouts. A white line stitched itself across the surface on the starboard bow, too straight for wake, too eager for a fish. "Torpedo starboard!" The cry ran down the decks like flame. Birch threw the helm over. The ship heeled, turned, and the first torpedo hissed past, its dark spindle ghosting under the foam. Men laughed in that tight, guilty way people do when luck rolls their way. Then the second streak came in low and fast and struck just abaft the bridge, near the sorting room, with a shock that pressed the ship as if a giant's palm had slapped her side. Steam shrieked, doors slammed, paper burst from torn mailbags and drifted like a sudden snow through the dim. On deck, a sheet of water and smoke roared over the rails. The Leinster staggered, found her feet, and Captain Birch ordered her around for home, the coastline lying to the west like a promise. Crewmen fought with davits already stubborn from salt and neglect. Nurses were shepherded toward the boats. Children were lifted along like parcels of living breath. The wind chopped at the sea, snapping white caps into their faces, and the list turned every step into a calculation. The third torpedo struck deeper, near the boilers, and the explosion felt less like sound than a conversion of air into force. Lights died. A ladder became a trap. Crockery, tied in with rails for a war at sea, tore loose and slid until the railings failed. The ship took a harder angle, and the recovery never came. Men with axes chopped at frozen blocks, while others fumbled with ropes and swore they could not feel their hands. A private from Lancashire tied a belt around a stranger and found his fingers shaking too hard to pull the knot. In the ruined sorting room, a clerk, bleeding at the scalp, tried to scoop letters into his pockets because duty, once carved into the bone, does not easily break. Some boats got away crooked and gulped green water, some thumped clean, some capsized at the falls. People gulped diesel-tasting sea and rose into spray and sunlight, unable to tell where the ship ended and the ocean began. Debris gathered with the tidy malice of wrecks, planks, chairs, a child's hat that kept an impossible line upon the waves. The Leinster's funnels leaned, her name on the bow tilted as if straining to read its own future. When the bow reared, the downrush of air smelled of hot iron and salt. The stern lifted, the screws thrashed at nothing, and the ship slid under with a shudder that traveled outward through bodies and into memory, where it would remain. Rescue began before the foam settled. Patrol boats, tugs, trawlers, and small craft dashed for the cries. Signal flags snapped, engines hammered, hands found wrists slick with cold. Lines arced and fell true or useless by inches. A half-swamped boat still held 3 women who passed a boy to a deckhand whose knuckles had gone bloodless. The seas were ugly, gusts cutting words into ribbons, but they pulled who they could. On the water, Numbers were both massive and personal, hundreds aboard at sailing. More than 500 would not come home, soldiers and nurses, clerks and civilians, and the seapost men whose job had been to tie two islands together with mail that now smeared and sank. Under the surface, the attacker turned away. It was UB-123, a small coastal U-boat under Oberleutnant Robert Ram, one of the last wolves still hunting with the Armistice nearly in sight. He had fired, watched, and slipped off into the gray belt where submarines vanished even when they lived. 9 days later, threading back through minefields, UB-123 hit fate laid in wire and went down with all hands. In ledger terms, the event closed neatly. In human terms, nothing balanced. On the Kingstown piers, news outran survivors. Hospital wards opened in corridors. Blankets were shaken, cots set out under gaslight. Telegram boys peddled narrow tires through streets where windows were already lifting. Families watched the eastern water in coats thrown over nightclothes, counting any speck that might become a boat. Across in Holyhead, similar rooms filled with the same mixture of salt, disinfectant, and stunned quiet. Lists started, found, missing, confirmed. The words sat like stones. A nurse held a teacup to a stranger's lips and kept her own hands from shaking by will alone. Afterward, the official voice was crisp. The ship, RMS Leinster. The date, 10th of October, 1918. The position, Irish Sea, east of Kish Bank. The attacker, UB-123. The likely toll, above 500. Charts were marked, reports filed. A court considered signals and zigzags, and the captain's decisions under conditions where the horizon could bite. The mail service counted its dead and honored clerks, who had sorted through shell bursts until they could not stand. The Navy wrote commendations for the crews who turned back into wreckage instead of away from it. None of that restored a single name read in churches the next Sunday. Walk the East Pier at Dún Laoghaire today, and you can still meet the weather from that morning. The ferry lane cuts its white geometry across pewter water. Gulls rake the wind. Plaques list the lost with the kind of exactness that cannot explain itself. Somewhere beyond the harbor wall, down in the silt where cold keeps secrets, lie plates and frames, and a torn post room where letters once traveled from wicker to hand in an unbroken line. The sea remembers without speaking. Those who stop long enough to listen hear a fragment, the slam of a bulkhead door, the stunned quiet after a blast, the insistence of a whistle, the breath a survivor drew as he saw a line snake toward him from a low, hard-driven boat. History calls Leinster a tragedy in the war's last month, and that is correct enough on paper. But tragedy is only the skin. The shape beneath is ordinary life interrupting ordinary life. A mother steadying two children at the rail, a soldier inventing a joke he cannot finish, a clerk pocketing a letter because he once promised neatness, a captain who put his bow toward home because that is what captains do. A torpedo cut across those lines and wrote a harsher sentence. The armistice that followed in November blessed many things. It did not return October's minutes to the clock. If you close your eyes, you can see the mail flag snapping above a clean deck, a spring before the war, the sea polite and unarmed. Open them and the water is the same color it was when the Leinster went down, only the ships have changed, and the letters arrive by circuits that do not rust. What remains is the habit of remembering. It lifts names out of the lists and walks them once more along a pier where people still wave as hulls edge past the lighthouse and out into water that can look so safe you forget what it knows. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.